Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and resistance fighter, developed a provocative and unsettling view of human stupidity, one that transcends a mere intellectual shortcoming or a simple lapse in judgment. For Bonhoeffer, stupidity is not merely a weakness. It is a profound and destructive social force that is, paradoxically, much more dangerous than evil itself. He argues that stupidity is a form of resistance to critical thinking, an active refusal to reflect on actions, ideas, and their consequences. Unlike evil, which can be confronted and restrained through reason, stupidity is impervious to intellectual engagement. It resists awareness, self-correction, and the capacity for change. Bonhoeffer's view illuminates the crucial distinction between ignorance and stupidity. While ignorance may stem from a lack of knowledge, stupidity is a deeper, more entrenched condition, an unwillingness or inability to embrace new ideas, facts, or viewpoints. Stupid individuals do not simply lack knowledge. They actively reject the possibility of learning or evolving their perspectives. They often cling to their unexamined beliefs and reject intellectual challenges that might force them to confront uncomfortable truths. As a result, stupidity is not simply an absence of thought. It is a refusal to think critically, which makes it an insidious and self-perpetuating force. In this sense, stupidity is far more dangerous than ignorance because it closes the door to growth and understanding. This dangerous mindset finds its most terrifying expression in the historical context of authoritarian regimes, particularly during the rise of Nazism. Bonhoeffer witnessed firsthand how the passive compliance of ordinary citizens became a central component of the regime's success. The refusal to think critically or question authority allowed the Nazi regime to carry out atrocities on an unimaginable scale. What made this compliance so destructive was not the presence of active malice, but rather the absence of resistance from individuals who had become numb to moral and intellectual inquiry. Stupid people, driven by a deep-seated passivity, allowed themselves to be swept up in the ideology of the regime, accepting its simplistic and dangerous narratives without question. The relationship between power and stupidity is another key aspect of Bonhoeffer's theory. When people gain positions of power, they often become less inclined to engage in critical thinking. The structures of power reinforce this by rewarding conformity and punishing independent thought. Those in power often surround themselves with advisors and systems that confirm their biases, creating a feedback loop of ignorance that is difficult to escape. As a result, the powerful may become less self-aware, more resistant to alternative viewpoints, and more prone to unquestioning obedience to authority. This dynamic creates an environment where decisions are made based on irrationality or incompetence, rather than rational deliberation. Stupidity, in this context, becomes a potent tool for the perpetuation of oppression and injustice. The real danger lies not in the malevolence of those in power, but in their inability or unwillingness to engage with complexity, question their own actions, or challenge the status quo. Bonhoeffer's paradox thus reveals a grim truth. Those who are stupid, and especially those in positions of authority, can be far more dangerous than those who act out of malice or evil intent. Their unthinking obedience to authority, their unwillingness to question, and their resistance to intellectual growth make them potent agents of social and political destruction. In a world where critical thinking and self-reflection are increasingly undervalued, Bonhoeffer's insights serve as a stark warning about the corrosive power of stupidity and the profound consequences it can have for society at large. Hannah Arendt, a German-American political theorist, expanded upon Bonhoeffer's ideas of stupidity by introducing the concept of the banality of evil. For Arendt, the greatest evil in modern society does not necessarily come from the most malicious or monstrous individuals, but rather from the ordinariness of those who commit horrific acts without any deep reflection on their consequences. This concept, introduced in her analysis of Adolf Eichmann during the Nuremberg trials, shifts the focus from a person's intrinsic malice to the alarming capacity of ordinary people to become agents of evil through thoughtless obedience and a lack of critical engagement. Arendt argued that Eichmann, a key architect of the Holocaust, was not a particularly evil man. Instead, He was a bureaucrat who lacked the capacity for moral reflection and merely followed orders without any consideration for the human cost. This banality of his actions did not make him less responsible. Rather, it showed that evil in the modern world can thrive not only in the hands of deranged individuals, but in the hands of those who simply fail to think critically about their roles in larger systems. Arendt's concept is deeply connected to Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity, as it underscores the danger of passivity and conformity in individuals. Eichmann's mindset exemplifies a kind of thoughtless obedience that is fueled by stupidity rather than malicious intent. He didn't act out of a desire to inflict harm, but rather out of an unthinking adherence to authority. Eichmann's failure to question his actions or reflect on their implications demonstrates the depth of intellectual and moral paralysis that can result from a refusal to engage in critical thought. This intellectual passivity, or stupidity, allowed Eichmann to become a key figure in one of the most horrific regimes in history. The banal nature of stupidity in this context is not limited to Eichmann alone. Arendt suggests that modern societies are particularly vulnerable to this kind of thoughtlessness due to the overwhelming pressures to conform and obey authority. Totalitarian regimes, in particular, exploit this psychological and intellectual inertia. They rely on the masses' inability or unwillingness to engage in independent thought and reflection, which creates a fertile ground for propaganda and manipulation. By controlling the flow of information and reducing complex issues to simple binary narratives, such regimes can effectively cultivate a populace that accepts their actions without question. This process transforms ordinary citizens into instruments of tyranny, not through their malice, but through their intellectual passivity and their failure to critically examine the world around them. Arendt's theory highlights how stupidity, when institutionalized in the form of blind obedience and uncritical thinking, can perpetuate oppressive systems. The individual's refusal to question the authority of the state, the disregard for moral responsibility, and the failure to recognize the larger consequences of one's actions are all hallmarks of the kind of thinking that enables tyranny. Arendt's insight is a call to action for all of us, to resist the pressures of conformity, to avoid falling into the trap of thoughtlessness, and to question the systems of power that shape our lives. It serves as a reminder that evil often flourishes in the absence of thoughtful reflection, and that our capacity for moral judgment depends on our ability to think critically about the world and our place in it. In modern society, the banality of stupidity continues to manifest in the form of passive acceptance of oppressive ideologies and policies. Whether in the workplace, the political arena, or in the face of social injustice, we often see individuals blindly following orders or adopting simplistic worldviews without understanding the broader implications. This intellectual laziness, which often masquerades as loyalty or patriotism, remains one of the most potent threats to democratic values and human rights. The true challenge is to awaken individuals from this intellectual slumber, to encourage independent thought, and to ensure that the mechanisms of power are held accountable to critical and moral scrutiny. Arendt's theory of the banality of stupidity serves as a poignant reminder that ordinary people, when caught in the grips of conformity and intellectual passivity, can become instruments of great harm. The question then becomes, how can we guard against this tendency in ourselves and in our societies? The answer lies in the cultivation of critical thinking, self-reflection, and the courage to resist the pressures of authority and conformity. Through these actions, we can break free from the destructive cycle of stupidity and work toward a more thoughtful, just world. Bertrand Russell, one of the most prominent philosophers of the 20th century, was deeply concerned with the intellectual trends of his time, especially the growing tendency to reward ignorance and penalize intelligence in modern society. He argued that foolishness, particularly in the realms of politics and society, often triumphs over intelligence, and that this reality plays a crucial role in shaping the course of history. Russell's critique of society's reverence for simple, populist ideas instead of complex, rational thinking resonates with Bonhoeffer's and Arendt's views on the dangers of stupidity. However, Russell takes this further by emphasizing the societal structures that not only tolerate, but actively encourage the triumph of ignorance. One of Russell's key arguments is that the structures of modern political and social systems often reward ignorance, while they penalize independent thinking and critical reasoning. In a world where complex issues are reduced to sound bites and slogans, the public is encouraged to adopt simplistic solutions that do not address the true complexity of the problems at hand. Russell saw this as a dangerous trend, especially in political discourse, where a leader who can present an easily digestible narrative is often more successful than one who offers nuanced, thoughtful analysis. The result is a society in which intelligence and reason are seen as burdens, and superficial, simplistic beliefs are lauded as virtuous. This intellectual climate paves the way for the rise of foolishness over intelligence, as individuals are drawn to narratives that promise certainty and simplicity, rather than confronting the uncomfortable complexity of reality. Russell's analysis also touches on the psychological comfort that comes with stupidity. People often find it easier to accept simple, black-and-white narratives that provide clear answers to complex questions. Critical thinking, on the other hand, can be uncomfortable and challenging. It requires the willingness to face ambiguity, uncertainty, and contradiction, things that most people are reluctant to do. The allure of simple answers, especially when reinforced by media and political leaders, is incredibly strong. Russell understood that while intelligence demands effort and introspection, stupidity offers a false sense of security. This preference for the comfort of stupidity over the discomfort of thoughtful, critical engagement helps explain why ignorance so often trumps knowledge in modern society. This phenomenon is amplified by the rise of mass media and social media in the 21st century. Russell's observations, though made in the mid-20th century, resonate deeply with today's media landscape, where misinformation and oversimplification reign supreme. In the digital age, the rapid dissemination of ideas through social media platforms has created echo chambers where people are exposed only to information that reinforces their existing beliefs. This contributes to the creation of ideological bubbles where critical thinking is replaced by groupthink. The spread of misinformation and the constant bombardment of soundbites make it more difficult for individuals to think critically about complex issues. The intellectual laziness fostered by these platforms leads to an environment where ignorance is not only tolerated but actively nurtured. Russell's critique, in this context, seems almost prophetic, as the digital age has only intensified the dynamics he warned about. In his essay, Philosophy and Politics, Russell also addressed the paradox that, in many political systems, intelligence and rational thinking can be seen as subversive or even dangerous. This is especially evident in authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, where those in power often prefer a compliant and uncritical populace to one that questions authority or challenges the status quo. Russell argued that the more intelligent and reflective individuals are in society, the more they are likely to find themselves at odds with the prevailing political ideology, and thus subjected to marginalization or repression. This creates a cycle in which intelligence is not only devalued but actively suppressed, leaving the field wide open for foolishness to thrive. As in Bonhoeffer's analysis of the link between stupidity and authoritarianism, Russell highlights the central role that intellectual passivity plays in enabling oppressive systems to persist. Russell's critique of the triumph of foolishness over intelligence serves as a powerful warning. The process of rewarding ignorance and undermining critical thinking is not a passive phenomenon. It is actively promoted through political, social, and media structures. The consequences of this trend are far-reaching. A society that prizes foolishness over reason is more likely to embrace simplistic and dangerous ideologies, ignore critical issues, and allow its political leaders to exploit the ignorance of the masses. Russell's insights compel us to reflect on the ways in which our own society might be nurturing a preference for foolishness, and to ask whether we are willing to confront the discomfort of intelligence in order to resist the destructive power of stupidity. Through education, intellectual curiosity, and a commitment to critical thought, we can begin to reverse the dangerous trend that Russell so eloquently described and create a society where intelligence, not ignorance, is celebrated and rewarded. Stupidity, in many ways, is not just an individual failing but a contagious social phenomenon. Ideas, especially irrational ones, spread rapidly through societies, often gaining strength and support simply through repetition and social reinforcement. This contagion of stupidity is particularly dangerous because it erodes independent thought and critical reflection on a collective level. The process by which irrational beliefs and simplistic ideas become widespread is not accidental. It is the result of complex psychological and social dynamics that encourage conformity, discourage dissent, and create environments where thoughtlessness thrives. From propaganda to peer pressure, the social structures that facilitate stupidity are powerful and deeply ingrained in the fabric of society. The rapid spread of ideas, particularly those that are not based on evidence or reason, is greatly facilitated by the mechanisms of mass media and social media. In the modern world, information flows at an unprecedented rate, and not all of it is reliable or thoughtful. Misinformation, fake news, and oversimplified narratives circulate quickly, often gaining traction simply because they are repeated over and over again. This repetition creates a false sense of legitimacy and truth, leading people to accept these ideas without critically examining their validity. In a world where anyone can be a broadcaster of information, the line between fact and fiction becomes increasingly blurred, making it difficult for individuals to discern reality from fiction. In this environment, independent thinking is undermined by the sheer volume of information that demands attention, leading people to gravitate toward the simplest, most familiar answers, rather than critically engaging with complex issues. One of the most dangerous aspects of the social contagion of stupidity is the role that social groups and peer pressure play in reinforcing ignorance. Humans are inherently social creatures, and our need for belonging and acceptance often overrides the desire to think independently. Social groups, whether they are political, religious, or ideological, create environments where certain beliefs and attitudes are normalized, while dissent or critical reflection is discouraged. This dynamic is particularly evident in polarized societies, where group identity becomes tightly linked to ideological purity. In such environments, people often stop thinking for themselves because they fear social rejection or alienation. The pressure to conform and the desire for social acceptance are so strong that individuals begin to adopt the beliefs and behaviors of the group without questioning them. Over time, this collective mentality leads to the widespread adoption of simplistic, uncritical worldviews that are often disconnected from reality. Another powerful driver of the social contagion of stupidity is the role of authority and hierarchy in shaping beliefs. From an early age, individuals are conditioned to accept the authority of figures such as teachers, parents, and political leaders without questioning them. In many societies, obedience to authority is seen as a virtue, and critical thinking is often discouraged in favor of conformity. This is particularly evident in totalitarian regimes, where dissent is punished and the state controls the flow of information. However, even in more democratic societies, the reverence for authority figures often leads people to blindly accept their ideas without scrutiny. When leaders and experts make pronouncements, especially on complex issues, many people defer to them without questioning the logic or evidence behind their statements. This deference to authority can be a significant barrier to independent thought, as it creates an environment where people stop thinking for themselves and instead rely on others to tell them what is true. The danger of the social contagion of stupidity lies not only in the spread of irrational beliefs, but also in its ability to stifle intellectual diversity and critical discourse. When everyone in a social group adopts the same set of unexamined ideas, it becomes more difficult to challenge those ideas or consider alternative perspectives. This intellectual homogenization leads to groupthink, where individuals prioritize consensus and social harmony over independent thinking and intellectual exploration. The result is a society in which ideas become stagnant, debates become shallow, and progress is hindered. In such an environment, intellectual laziness becomes the norm, and those who dare to think critically or question the status quo are often ostracized or marginalized. Escaping the social contagion of stupidity requires a conscious effort to resist conformity and to cultivate independent thinking. One of the most important strategies for doing so is to develop a mindset that values questioning, curiosity, and skepticism. Rather than accepting ideas at face value, individuals must learn to interrogate the information they encounter and ask difficult questions about its source, logic, and evidence. This requires a willingness to step outside of one's social comfort zone and to engage with ideas that challenge one's beliefs. It also requires the courage to stand apart from the crowd and resist the pressures of groupthink. Furthermore, the development of critical thinking skills should be seen as a lifelong endeavor, one that involves constant learning, self-reflection, and openness to new perspectives. In a world where the contagion of stupidity can spread quickly, these intellectual tools are essential for safeguarding one's ability to think for oneself and to contribute to a more thoughtful, discerning society. Ultimately, the social contagion of stupidity is not an insurmountable force, but it requires active resistance. By encouraging critical thinking, embracing intellectual diversity, and questioning authority, individuals can break free from the collective mindset that perpetuates ignorance. The spread of irrationality and conformity can be countered through education, dialogue, and a commitment to independent thought. In doing so, we can reclaim the power of reason and ensure that intelligence and reflection continue to shape our collective future. In the face of widespread ignorance, manipulation, and intellectual passivity, escaping the cycle of stupidity is not just a personal challenge, it is a societal imperative. As we've seen throughout history, and particularly in the ideas of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, the collective embrace of stupidity can have catastrophic consequences. But just as these forces are social in nature, so too are the strategies for resisting them. In this final section, we will explore how the insights from these thinkers can help us protect ourselves from falling victim to the contagion of stupidity. The key lies in cultivating independent thought, nurturing a commitment to critical engagement, and building a society that values intellectual complexity over simplistic ideologies. First and foremost, Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity underscores the importance of continuous intellectual engagement. To escape the trap of stupidity, we must commit ourselves to lifelong learning and the pursuit of truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Bonhoeffer's critique of passivity is particularly relevant today, as the pressure to conform and the temptation of easy answers are ever present. The most effective way to resist these forces is to continually challenge ourselves to think critically about the world around us. This means not only seeking out new information, but also actively questioning our existing beliefs and assumptions. True intellectual growth requires humility and the ability to accept that we might be wrong. In an age where people often seek out only information that reinforces their worldview, the courage to embrace complexity and to entertain opposing perspectives is more crucial than ever. Arendt's idea of the banality of evil offers another important lesson for escaping the cycle of stupidity: the need for moral and intellectual reflection. Arendt demonstrated that one of the greatest dangers in modern society is the willingness of ordinary people to abdicate their moral responsibility and intellectual autonomy in the face of authority. To break free from this cycle, we must reject passive obedience and embrace our role as active moral agents in the world. This means developing the capacity to question authority, to engage with challenging ideas, and to take responsibility for our actions. As Arendt argued, thoughtlessness is not just a personal failing but a societal one. Therefore, we must make it our collective duty to resist thoughtlessness and to foster spaces in which independent, critical thought can flourish. Bertrand Russell's critique of the triumph of foolishness over intelligence calls us to recognize the systems and structures that actively promote ignorance. In many modern societies, intelligence is devalued and stupidity is rewarded, especially in the realm of politics. To protect ourselves from the influence of stupidity, we must recognize the intellectual forces that shape our world and be vigilant about the media, political ideologies, and social structures that perpetuate simplistic and reductionist thinking. Russell believed that society often rewards conformity and punishes dissent, especially when it comes to complex, challenging issues. To escape the cycle of stupidity, we must cultivate the courage to question prevailing narratives and to push against the forces that seek to reduce complex issues to soundbites and slogans. Engaging with the world critically, rather than passively absorbing whatever is presented to us, is the first step toward intellectual freedom. The media, particularly social media, is one of the most significant drivers of the contagion of stupidity in contemporary society. It is here that ideas are simplified, distorted, and rapidly disseminated. Social media algorithms, designed to maximize engagement, often prioritize content that is emotionally charged and sensationalist over nuanced, thoughtful discourse. This creates an environment where ignorance thrives and critical thinking is sidelined. To protect ourselves from this, we must become more discerning consumers of information. This requires developing media literacy skills and learning to recognize bias, misinformation, and propaganda. By questioning the sources of our information, we can begin to break free from the influence of the social media echo chamber and seek out more reliable, well-rounded perspectives. Another strategy for resisting the influence of stupidity is to surround ourselves with people who challenge our thinking and encourage intellectual growth. While social conformity is a powerful force, we are also deeply influenced by those around us. By building networks of individuals who value critical thinking, diversity of thought, and intellectual honesty, we create a counterbalance to the social pressures that encourage conformity. These relationships can provide the intellectual nourishment necessary to resist the pull of groupthink and to foster an environment in which new ideas can flourish. It is essential, then, to prioritize relationships with individuals who encourage reflection, debate, and intellectual curiosity. In addition, fostering a culture of intellectual humility is essential for escaping the cycle of stupidity. Humility in thought allows us to recognize that our knowledge is always limited and that we have much to learn. It frees us from the intellectual arrogance that often accompanies certainty and invites us to engage with the world in a more open, inquisitive manner. In a society where people often feel the pressure to appear confident and sure of their opinions, intellectual humility is a rare but valuable quality. By cultivating this humility, we can approach the world with a greater sense of curiosity, willingness to learn, and capacity for growth. Ultimately, escaping the cycle of stupidity is not just about resisting external forces. It is also about cultivating internal resilience. We must learn to trust our own ability to think critically and to question what we are told. This is especially difficult in a world where misinformation and oversimplification are rampant, but it is not impossible. By continually challenging ourselves, questioning authority, developing intellectual humility, and fostering a community of independent thinkers, we can protect ourselves from the influence of stupidity and become active participants in the creation of a more thoughtful, reflective society. In conclusion, the ideas of Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell offer a powerful roadmap for escaping the cycle of stupidity. While the forces that perpetuate ignorance are strong, they are not insurmountable. Through a commitment to lifelong learning, moral reflection, intellectual courage, and social responsibility, we can protect ourselves from the contagion of stupidity. By doing so, we ensure that intelligence, critical thought, and moral integrity remain central to our personal lives and to the health of our societies. In the face of the pervasive influence of stupidity, we must become the resistors, the thinkers, and the questioners who shape a better, more enlightened future. As we've explored throughout this video, the influence of stupidity in our society is a powerful and dangerous force, one that can shape political landscapes, social dynamics, and even our personal beliefs. But by understanding the mechanisms behind it and adopting the lessons of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, we can protect ourselves from falling into the trap of intellectual passivity. It's up to each of us to cultivate critical thinking, resist the pressures of conformity, and commit ourselves to lifelong learning in order to break free from the cycle of stupidity. If you found this discussion insightful and are eager to dive deeper into these complex ideas, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We upload new videos every day, helping you acquire valuable knowledge from a variety of thought-provoking topics. For those of you interested in further enriching your understanding, check out the link in the description and the pinned comment for a selection of recommended books that will take you on a journey of intellectual exploration. Stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay critical. Until next time, keep questioning and keep growing.